I did really enjoy doing this, and I wonder. Okay, I'm going to respond to this. I don't know why. On your collapse of the USSR, take my country's in a much better place now that it's part of the EU. I don't think you understand the despair of breadlines and the fear of secret police. It's disturbing that you would look at the misery inflicted on my family and friends under communism and call it good. I think when you talk about like breadlines in the USSR and the secret police and all this stuff, we have to understand also what was happening in the USSR at that time, which was that it was under constant threat by the imperialist powers. We're going to look at a Michael Parenti clip that might change your mind on this, Element Wander, because I don't doubt that bad stuff did happen in the USSR, and there were economic problems. Part of the reason for that, though, isn't some inherent communist thing. Part of the reason for that is because they were under constant siege by America and the very, very powerful forces of global capitalism that were ensuring that they couldn't have a functional economy for the exact reason that they were trying to overthrow it. So I wouldn't deny that some bad things happened in the USSR, but I have to think we have to look a little bit beyond just these incidents and take a little step backwards and ask why these incidents were happening, why these economies were suffering, why the USSR felt the need to have a secret police. The reason they needed to have a secret police was because you had powerful organizations like the CIA constantly trying to infiltrate them and undermine them. And when you live in a society that's under this constant threat of violent imperialism, which is what was happening in the USSR, as a sort of defense mechanism, I think you develop these kinds of tendencies. Parenti called this siege socialism. So I think it's a little bit reductive to say like this is some inherent problem with communism and not something that was deliberately inflicted on these Eastern Bloc nations at the behest of the United States and these Western capitalist powers. Anyway, there's breadlines happening in the United States now. And also, it's also just a reality that in many of these Eastern Bloc states, this is true. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, you've seen suicide rates skyrocket. You've seen quality of life go down. You've seen education and literacy go down. You're seeing access to healthcare going down. There's a lot of, regardless of what's happened in your personal situation, there is a lot of evidence that quality of life for a lot of people in these formerly communist Eastern Bloc countries has gone down significantly since the end of the USSR and the collapse of the Berlin Wall and all that stuff. I don't think my uncle having to go to Afghanistan and kill Afghans for the USSR was because of American imperialism. It kind of was. It kind of was for that reason. Everyone I know is thriving and having a much better life. Okay, well, I'll just discount all the statistics that very clearly show that these tendencies have gone in this direction. Because if your family and friends are doing okay, that means that it's all fine. So thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you for setting us all straight on this. Now I think capitalism is good, actually. You've convinced me. I've been convinced. Who knew that exploiting the global south would make Europe better? Crazy. When you put it like that. Okay, well, I did just want to watch this clip from the last episode just because it was funny. But I think I'm going to put on this clip from Parenti, which I think is important about this very subject.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
Can someone please find... Is it this? Oh, fuck. If someone can please find the Parenti clip that I'm talking about that addresses this exact subject. I think it was in the Discord server. Do you think so? It might be this. I'm not sure. Can someone find the clip that I'm talking about where he's talking about, there wouldn't have been a secret police without the CIA and that stuff. Can someone find that for me, please? I would really, really appreciate that because that's very relevant to what we're talking about. Care to comment on the controversy surrounding you accepting money from China? In all seriousness, if China contacted me and was like, we want to give you money for doing propaganda for us, I would be like, absolutely. Where do I sign up? Because I got to pay the rent, folks. I'm sorry. I don't... we all got to do what we have to do. Why are anti-communists so obsessed with Rob? Well, it's because I accurately point out their fascist tendencies, and it really upsets them. It really upsets them when I point out these fascist tendencies that they have. It really, triggers them, if you say. Yeah, if you attack DGG's daddy, that's it. Logic Master Steven. Omni-liberal Steven.
I guess.
Yeah, I believe this is it. Let's check this out. And we lost Farlawful again, but if anyone's interested in this subject, I think is important to talk about when we talk about conditions in the USSR. I think it's important to talk about this.
Guess what I want to ask, in opening on with this thing about Stalin, is that the Gulag, with its millions of victims, if you listen to Solzhenitsyn and Sakharov, supposedly existed in the Soviet Union right down to the very last days of communism.
Is this it?
I guess.
Okay, is that the same thing? It's the same thing. Yeah, Carl, I want to watch that Biden clip. We're going to look at this. We're going to look at that Biden clip before we sign up, before we sign off today. This was in the Discord.
Mercenary armies, destruction of the productive facilities of the society, more invasion, more sabotage, economic boycott, economic embargo, monetary embargo, technological embargo.
Okay, why is it not playing though?
Mercenary army, all that. Lenin turned and said, we've had enough opposition.
This is the clip that I want, but the clip that was posted, I believe, had video. Well, we can listen to it. I'm sure there's an actual clip of this, the actual video.
Mercenary armies, destruction of the productive facilities of the society, more invasion, more sabotage, economic boycott, economic embargo, monetary embargo, technological embargo, which have distorting effects upon a society. In May of 1921, Lenin got up before the Bolshevik Party convention and he said, we've had enough with the workers' opposition. Let's get rid of them. Now, the workers' opposition were loyal Bolsheviks. They were communists. They were in the Bolshevik Party. They were in the Communist Party. When the Kronstadt Rebellion came, the workers' opposition did not side with the Kronstadt sailors. They sided with the party. In the Civil War, they were with the party. Throughout all the struggles, the workers' opposition were with the party. But they had formed a self-conscious caucus that had decided that it would represent the particular interests of the industrial proletariat against the party itself at times. And after all this invasion, all this destruction, all this terrible death and struggle, where Lenin once said Soviet Russia is like a man with a death fever just hanging on by an inch of his life, after all that, Lenin turned and said, we've had enough opposition. The feeling very much was that that opposition was a wedge, an opening. It invited our enemies, our mortal enemies, to come in and attack us and divide us. And the party convention uproariously supported him and said, no more workers' opposition, no more factions within the party. So right there, that emphasis on a monolithic party. And by the way, that same month, or the month before, in April...
Hold on one sec. Is it this? Oh, nope. That's the whole lecture. Fuck. Why can't I find it? It's weird.
Lenin called for a strengthening of the trade unions and for more worker representation on the Central Committee of the Communist Party. So it wasn't that he was moving anti-worker. It was that he was moving against opposition. So right there you see the seeds, of a system that could not develop naturally. with an opposition, with checks, with internal debate and argument. A system that began to strain for uniformity, for siege, for lockstep cooperation, the emphasis being on organizing, getting the thing done.
This one has pic instead of video.
Mercenary armies, destruction of the production, our mortal enemies to come in and attack us and divide us. And the party convention uproariously supported him and said, no more workers' opposition, no more factions within the party. So right there, that emphasis on a monolithic party. And by the way, that same month...
And again, so people have been talking to me about, what I'm talking about, the very real things that America has done, the atrocities, the genocide that America has carried out after the World War II period when they absorbed all these fascists into their government. And then I had people saying, well, Rob, what about the USSR and what about this and what this terrible thing that happened in the Eastern Bloc? And this is why I think this clip is really important, because he talks about this authoritarianism that we hear about in conjunction with these Soviet societies and why it happens. And I think it's a really interesting way of taking that argument and trying to understand why these tendencies popped up in the USSR. It didn't just happen. It didn't just happen in a vacuum. These societies were under threat, under constant threat. And that's not a conspiracy theory. America always talks about being under threat by Russia or whoever. This was very real. This was like the most powerful government and military and intelligence apparatus in the world constantly trying to undermine them. And as a result, that led directly to these kinds of what we might understand as authoritarian tendencies. It's the enemy that's always acting. We're simply reacting. That's right. Yeah. That's what they tell themselves, isn't it?
Month before, in April, Lenin called for a strengthening of the trade unions and for more worker representation on the Central Committee of the Communist Party. So it wasn't that he was moving anti-worker, it was that he was moving against opposition. So right there you see the seeds, of a system that could not develop naturally with an opposition, with checks, with internal debate and argument. A system that began to strain for uniformity, for siege, for lockstep cooperation, the emphasis being on organizing, getting the thing done, stop asking too many questions because everything was a life and death issue. When the Sandinistas came to power in Nicaragua 10 years ago, filled with ideals and hopes for their nation and their people, they discovered a very awful thing. And it wasn't about themselves, even though they had to do it to themselves. It was about that capitalist encirclement. They discovered that they needed a secret police. They discovered that they needed a security police. Because all around them, coming in from two borders and within their own society, were acts of sabotage, espionage, attack, mercenary invasion, and the like.
This is what I want to know from these people that are like, well, what about these terrible things the USSR did, the secret police, and all these authoritarian tendencies? That's the kind of question that I have with this, is what the fuck were they supposed to do? What were they supposed to do? They were under threat. They had to do... Were they supposed to just be like, well, we'll just let the Americans come in here and bring in all their spies and saboteurs and bring them into our country, and because we don't want like Western leftists in the future to get upset about our authoritarian actions. We wouldn't want that. We wouldn't want like social democrat and liberal streamers that we're inventing decades in the future. We want them to criticize us and get mad at us. So I guess we'll just let all this stuff happen, let the sabotage happen, and just bring all these spies in, and who cares? We'll just, because we wouldn't want to be authoritarian. It really does make sense. Sorry, I missed the Engels quote, Red Scary. Do I have to go back up? I don't see it. I don't see your comment about it. I don't know. I'm not sure. There can be no freedom while the proletariat state has enemies. There can be no abolition of the state. Okay, it's from hours ago. Yeah. This is more Twitch streamers need to understand this. There's no abolition of the state as long as these enemies are out there. And when you have the most powerful country in all of human history out there, that's a pretty significant enemy. And you're actually not doing anything to build socialism just by arbitrarily giving up and allowing this country to just like continue their total dominance over the entire world economic system. But at the same time, China does have, China now and the USSR then does have to contend with Western social democrat streamers and getting upset at them. So maybe they should take that into account as well. So long as the proletariat still needs the state, it does not need it in the interest of freedom, but in order to hold down its adversaries. And as soon as it becomes possible to speak of freedom, the state as such ceases to exist. And yeah, and that's what people, again, my friends in the liberal and social democrat streaming community need to wrap their minds around this. That the perfect, idealized, utopian, classless, stateless society that they've imagined, and that they hold every single modern effort at maintaining a socialist society, they hold it up to this impossible standard. We're hundreds of years from ever even being a possibility of achieving that. So you might as well just let go of this idea of the classless stateless society for now and join the correct side in this ongoing global struggle, which we need to win if we want to have this utopian society, or we want our grandkids or our great-grandkids to have it. We're not going to have it, ever. We might as well just accept this now. And in the meantime, we can fight to be on the correct side of this global struggle that's currently taking place. Biden said no to Ukraine about NATO again. That is funny. Sometimes you do have to give it up for him, right, Grandpa Joe? You do have to give it up for him sometimes.
So sabotage, espionage, attack, mercenary invasion, and the like. And they understood that if the revolution was going to survive, it would have to build up instruments of state power, instruments of coercion even. And these instruments, by the way, can make mistakes. And these instruments can not only make mistakes, they can commit some serious crimes. Although in Nicaragua, the impressive record is how few crimes there were, given the utterly dire conditions they were under. So that kind of, that capitalist encirclement, which goes on, unrelenting, attacking any existing socialist, communist, if you don't want to call, by the way, if some of you don't want to call those societies socialist, don't call them socialist, call them.
And again, this is why I like Parenti. Sometimes it seems like Parenti is really speaking to us directly from the past. And I really wish that more of my friends in the social democrat and liberal Twitch streaming world would internalize this idea. If you don't want to call it if you don't want to call it socialist, if it's offensive to you to call these countries like China or the USSR socialist or communist, just don't do it. Call it whatever the fuck you want. That's fine. More people I wish would internalize this message. And this is part of my cross to bear. It's because I'm trying to share this information. I'm trying to spread this idea here on this platform that's dominated by liberals and social democrats. And some of them really don't like to hear it. But I have to continue doing it because this is what I see as kind of being my role here. So let's hear this again from Parenti. Again, more of our friends in the social democrat and liberal streaming world, or anarchist world, should listen to this part.
Them unrelenting, attacking any existing socialist, communist, if you don't want to call, by the way, if some of you don't want to call those societies socialist, don't call them socialist. Call them window shades or camels, whatever you want to call them. As long as you know what I mean, that I mean the public ownership of the means of production, using capital in a different way, not for capital accumulation per se as an end in itself, a strong social wage, free education, free medical care, and subsidized housing, subsidized food, subsidized bread, all those things that the Hungarians and Poles are now complaining about losing. That's what I mean by socialist. If you don't want to call that socialist, that's not what real socialism is. Something that's going to exist someday when the world and people are better and different, and it's going to come down and be in a much better form than those things were. That's fine. But in this world, see, I believe socialism is not that real, beautiful goal in that society, participation, harmony, this and that. I believe that socialism is a process of struggle to achieve that thing.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Fuck, I wish more people on this platform would understand this idea. Let go of the perfect version of socialism that you've invented, and come join us here in the real world. In the real world, where we have to deal with the real historical ramifications and like the real geopolitical situation. Come join us here in reality and stop living in this fucking fantasy world that you've invented, where you can feel superior to everyone. I'm superior to the people in the US. Oh, and of course I'm superior to these people in China or North Korea or Venezuela or any of these other countries that are struggling to institute socialism and struggling to form an economic system in opposition to our current global political system, under constant threat, under constant sanction and threat of invasion and coups and these things. Come join us here in reality. And then maybe we can have some real conversations about this stuff. Stop living in this goddamn fantasy world. It's not, I know it helps you feel superior, but it's not actually helpful to building any kind of internationalist movement or building any kind of movement that's going to challenge the current Western ruling class that are controlling all these geopolitical events and controlling the global economy. Come join us here in the real world with the reality of history and the reality of our current geopolitical situation.
Count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Newman, a new subscriber. Thank you very much for the Prime bucks. Newman is someone that understands this concept. Newman wants to be with us here in the real world and not in the fake fucking anarchist fantasy land where a lot of people want to set up shop. Newman understands this. Thank you, Newman. Newman. People are saying this. Thank you, Newman. Yeah. Time to grow up, libs and soak dems and dem soaks, whatever else they want to call themselves, left communists. Come join us here in the real world, please. Stop living in fantasy land. You're not accomplishing anything except feeling morally superior, and that's the only thing you're accomplishing.
So just go along with my vocabulary if you have even if you have trouble with it. Those socialist or communist societies suffered terrible distorting effects. If there had been no invasion, if there had been no espionage, if there had been no attack, if there had been no White Guard armies burning villages, there wouldn't have been a Red Army of that size. There wouldn't have been a Stalin, there wouldn't have been a KGB. If there hadn't been a CIA, there wouldn't have been a KGB. If there hadn't been a NATO encirclement, there wouldn't have been a Warsaw Pact. And to lose sight of that,
how do you have a society that looks like this, under constant threat? How do you do that without having to kind of resort to these kind of tactics that very comfortable Westerners in 2021 living in the United States will say, like, no, that's authoritarian. I don't agree with that. I'm a communist, but I renounce that. Fucking get real. I think they call that historical materialism. I'm not a big theory guy. I'm pretty sure there's one of these famous socialist theorists that talk a little bit about this. Maybe someone can fucking start to follow these principles. But who benefits of a system of action and reaction in the end? I regret showing you this emote, Don Dark Sony. I showed my coworker a map of all US bases around China and he was shocked. Or like Iran. Like, it's fucking crazy. How do you have a society like that? I don't know. Okay, I'm running out of time. Let's continue this because I want to get to the Biden thing before we finish this.
Of an essential force of what was going on over those 70 years. Or 10 years. And if you want to know what the Soviet Union went through in its early years, just look at what Nicaragua went through in these
around
10
North
years.
Korea, that's right, Cinnamon
Challenge.
Challenge.
That by 10. Every single one of those countries was targeted. They were targeted by missiles. They were targeted by acts of espionage. They were targeted by, as I say, economic embargo and all sorts of other forms of aggression. They were targeted by incredible propaganda barrages and the like. Unrelenting, unremitting. The most targeted socialist country in the world as of a couple of years ago, and actually still to today, is not Nicaragua, was not Nicaragua. Not even Cuba. It was the Soviet Union. all those missiles were pointing to the USSR. They still are, and they're still building those missiles, and they're refusing to negotiate those missiles, the sea-based missiles, which is where the U.S. has 75% of its first strike force. They have announced that they will not negotiate that 75% of the first strike force, only their 25%, which is land-based. And the Soviets, of course, 75% of their force is land-based, and only 25% is sea-based, and none of it working very well because they've got just a few choke points and they don't have that much access to sea. And they don't have all the fueling stations and harbors and whatever else that the U.S. has around the world. So that kind of encirclement is still there, and that kind of thing is still going on. And so if you want to understand something about it, and that's why Gorbachev is one of the reasons he's trying to normalize international relations, even at the risk of giving away the whole store.
And that he did, right?